following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Yo, Philly, how you's doing? Welcome to Philadelphia Baseball, past, present, and personal. This is Bill Kashatus, your host on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Hard to believe, but this podcast is coming up on its second anniversary. Over that span, I've been fortunate to count on the support of many people who've allowed me to tell the history of Philadelphia baseball on air. Chief among those folks is Ralph Tycho, the producer of Comfortably Zoned Network. Without his kindness and encouragement, this podcast would have been dead in its infancy, and I'm truly grateful to him. As you can imagine, there have been many personal rewards over the last 2 years, interviewing former managers, owners, and especially players, many of whom I saw perform as a youngster. There was also renewing friendships or making the acquaintances of other lesser-known folks who've made worthy contributions to the game. There have also been many challenges and disappointments. Most of these have come when former players refused to return phone calls or promised to do an interview and then back out at the last minute. My knee-jerk reaction when that happens is to bemoan the fact that the more current players, and I'm speaking of those since the beginning of free agency, are much less accessible than those of earlier generations, and that they do not feel a responsibility to contribute to the historical record unless they're being compensated financially for it. But when I put the situation in perspective, their rejections make me realize how fortunate I am to have made the friendships of former players like Mike Schmidt, Larry Christensen, and Rocky Colavito. Those friendships have allowed me to live the dream, so to speak, of experiencing Major League Baseball, at least during the respective eras when they played. There is another former Major Leaguer who I value and came to know many years ago. Unfortunately, Tug McGraw is no longer with us. He passed away 15 years ago on January 5th, 2004, of brain cancer at the relatively young age of 59. For all his celebrity, Tug never considered himself a star, and he was often at a loss when he was treated that way. Yet he always made himself accessible to the fans and would do so freely without charging a cent unless he was contractually obligated to do so. The Tugger was my friend and a person who truly loved the game of baseball and its rich history. He tended to embrace others who felt the same way. Tug will always hold a special place in my heart, not only for his friendship and wonderful sense of humor, but because he entered my life at a particularly difficult period and taught me how to smile, even laugh, when it seemed so impossible to do. For those listeners who were not fortunate enough to experience the Tugger, as well as for those who remember his fun-loving nature and colorful antics, I'd like to dedicate this podcast to him. What follows is an audio tape of a special program Tug did at the Chester County Historical Society on September 15th, 1999. In it, he recounts his memories of the Phillies' 1980 season and the team's first World Series title. I hope you will enjoy it as much as I did when the Tugger graced that audience with his remarkable storytelling. Enjoy.
Proud to have been a Major League Baseball player, and any of us that have the opportunity to wear a Major League uniform, I'm sure feel the same way. I was a young lad in Northern California when baseball sort of came and got me. I don't think that I really, beyond some wild dreams, planned on being a Major League Baseball player. And when I was a young lad, about the age of these guys down here in the front row, and some of you sitting around, my dreams were, number one, I wanted to be a truck driver. My dad drove trucks, and we lived near the Napa Valley, and I remember the famous words in the summertime when Dad would say, "The fruit haul is on." And that's when it was time to harvest. And our summer jobs growing up in the 40s and 50s, our summer jobs were to go in the Napa Valley and harvest the crops. And back then, Before the grapes took over, it was walnuts, almonds, plums, pears, and apricots. And so we worked the summer harvesting those crops. And then, of course, the vineyards were around, but nothing like they are today. And hence the name Valley of the Fruits and Nuts. And if there's any question or any doubt, since this is the 90s, I came out a nut. But when I was a young lad, my first dream was to be a truck driver. And then later on, Dad changed his job, and he became a fireman. And, of course, I then wanted to be a fireman. And it was a wonderful thing, Dad driving around town in his fire truck and coming to the schools. He was an inspector and giving demonstrations on fire safety in an auditorium just like this in our schools. And I was very, very proud of my father. Dad took the time, and he made every effort he could to be at every one of the games that he could make. He took the time to try to help coach. He took the time to even drive the school bus. Of course, he did have a driver's license. But the thing I remember most about those years is that thinking and dreaming about becoming a ball player, not so much actually thinking that it was possible. I never thought I would grow up to be one. The first time that I ever gave it any real consideration is when it actually was really physically there for me. So when the New York Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers vacated New York and headed west, it was New York's loss and California's gain. And I know the East Coast doesn't like to celebrate California, but because of that, you got me. And I got you. And we came together. And the first ball game I ever went to, I was a freshman in high school in 1958. And the Giants were playing at a ballpark called Seal Stadium right near the Hams Brewery in San Francisco, California. And it was about a good hour and a half drive for us to get there before they put in the freeways. And I remember in those days I played center field most of the time. And I lived to hit. There's only one reason to play baseball in my mind, then and now, and that is to earn your ups, baby. You got to have that bat in your hand. There's nothing in the world like making solid contact and having that ball leave the bat and then seeing how far you could make it. Just a beautiful thing. And so Willie Mays was my idol. And I remember going to Candlestick Park, and we sat out in the bleachers in left field, 50 cents. And after the game, you could walk down the stairs, you could walk onto the field, across center field. Howie, you remember this ballpark? You could go across center field and out the right field corner to the parking lot where your car was. So we're walking across the outfield from left field to right field, and I never took my eyes off Willie Mays during the game. Not once. And as we got to center field, I put my foot behind my leg, and I tripped myself so that I could fall down on the ground and get big league grass stains on my foremost jeans that my mother bought me at J.C. Penney's so I could look nice at the ballpark. And how in the world did he come home with grass stains? Well, not only did I get my grass stains, as I got up, I clenched my fingers into the turf, and I pulled up some blades of grass and quick stuck them in my pocket, knowing that I was going to jail. First crime I ever committed. And I released the grass into my pockets, and when I got home that night, unlike today, the kitchen always had a big roll of wax paper in it. Now we have saran wrap. But if your mother bakes, if you ladies still bake, you know you have to have wax paper. But it was also very educational, this paper, because we used it in school projects. We took butterflies and bugs and leaves and flowers and put it in the wax paper, put it in a book. Remember this? And let it dry out, and then we used it for school reports. Well, I was the only guy in my school that had big league grass in his wax paper. And I kept it under my pillow for I don't know how long, so that I could dream about someday becoming a big league ball player. So that was the beginning of the dream, really seeing actual ball players out there and really feeling like the game had gotten a grip on me. The community that I grew up in was a wonderful community. It's called Vallejo, California. It's the gateway to Napa Valley. It was mostly a military town. We had a Navy yard there, and we had an Air Force base nearby, Mare Island Naval Shipyard, Travis Air Force Base. And it was a multicultural community. And we had a wonderful, I can't tell you how wonderful our sports programs were. And the community, the businesses, and the fathers and the mothers, the women's auxiliary, the fathers were all coaches, and the businesses, there were signs on all the fences, and never did we lack for anything to do with our free time. We had baseball, football, basketball, track, tennis, swimming, you name the sports. We had soapbox derbies. We had kite flying contests that had to be a homemade kite. And we had arts and crafts, and we had everything. So as a young kid, our minds were opened to all these wonderful things because the community cared about us. And that's so important for all of us when we're growing up. And so that led to me staying interested in sports. And actually, you know, the other sports outgrew me. Football, I lasted into college. Basketball through high school. Track, high school. Swimming, a little bit of college. But baseball, I don't know, I just kept going out. I kept making the team, kept going out, kept making the team. The next thing you know, it was a process of elimination. Baseball embraced me. And I said, thank you for the hug. And I just kept going. And I got a chance to play professional baseball. And my first professional game was in Cocoa, Florida. In 1964, I was out of college a month and a half, if that. And my brother was playing in the minor leagues. As a matter of fact, my brother is responsible for me getting a contract to play professional baseball because he was in his third year of minor league baseball. And I went to visit him and throw batting practice for his team. He had arranged that. And I was going to go into the service. Back then, we all had to go into the service. And before I went into the Marine Corps, I was going to spend the summer watching my brother's apartment and throw batting practice when the team was home. And my brother saw me pitch. He'd never seen me pitch since he graduated from high school, which was 3 years prior. So he'd never seen me pitch. I became a full-time pitcher. When he was around, I pitched just a little bit. And so he saw me pitching batting practice, and I was like 5'7", 5'8", 140 pounds. And my brother said to the manager, he says, my little brother can pitch. And the manager says, not my job. My job is to run this team. If you want to get your brother signed, go talk to somebody else. So my brother talked to some scouts, and they said I was too small. And my brother responded by saying, but I've seen other guys, I've been in pro ball 3 years now, I've seen other guys that weren't any bigger than he is, and somebody gave them a chance. And they said, well, we're not interested. And he said, well, if you're not interested in my brother, I'm not interested in you. And he threatened to quit. And he was leading the team in home runs and RBIs. And he was hitting 300. And they said, oh, wait a minute, maybe we'll give him a chance. So they sent me down to Cocoa, Florida in the rookie league. And the league consisted of 4 teams all playing in the same complex. It was the Houston Astros' brand new spring training facility and minor league complex. In fact, they're the first ones, I think, to make one of these new facilities down there. And I went down there, and for 10 days, the manager of the team was a gentleman by the name of Ken Deal. Did you ever run across him, Howie? We used to have a nickname for him that this is such a wonderful building, I wouldn't want to use the word in here. And he told me, he knew my brother. He had my brother the year before. He knew the circumstances under which I was there. And he said, McGraw, you're going to get one chance. And he says, don't unpack your bags because after you pitch, you're going back home again. And I said, yes, sir. My brother had warned me, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, sir, no, sir. That's all you say. So I got my chance to pitch. I got the ball. And I threw a no-hitter. And the same day, It's the only no-hitter I've ever thrown in my life for more than one inning. So I threw a no-hitter, and my brother had a doubleheader that day. Now, his reputation was on the line, too, for forcing this issue with his little brother. So I called him up to tell him about my game, and as it turns out, he hit 4 home runs, had 6 hits, and 8 RBIs. He wasn't leaving himself exposed. He covered his own territory. And so between the two of us, it was a beautiful day. And, of course, my father was beside himself. Well, from there, things just started to happen. And so the point is here, without going into every detail of my life in baseball, the point I'm trying to make here is that communities are so important, and to have the Chester County Historical Society do a baseball exhibit so that the opportunity to learn a little bit about baseball history and some of the legends of the game for the young people in the community to grow up and have the opportunity to share the same passion for the game that their parents had, and their grandparents, and their grandparents, and their great-grandparents. For them to have the same opportunity to fall in love and embrace the game is so very important. And the reason I say it's so important is because when we talk about a baseball team in our community, whether it be the Phillies, whether it be the Reading Phillies, or the Wilmington Ball Club, the Blue Rocks, what does it mean when we say, I love the Phillies, or I'm mad at the Phillies? What does all that mean? When I was standing on the mound in Veterans Stadium during the 1980 World Series with 64,000 people cheering and sweating and straining and wondering, I was doing the same thing on the mound. I wanted this all my life. I wanted to be, you know, when you're a little kid and you're in the backyard and you're throwing the ball up in the air and you're reaching over the fence and you're just using your imagination, you just brought in a ball, saved a home run, and won the World Series. Or you're throwing a ball against the wall and you're hitting a certain spot, you hit that knot hole in the fence and you just struck somebody out to win the World Series. I'm standing on the mound and all those dreams are coming true. And I'm saying, if this is something I wanted, and if it was so important to me, why am I so scared? This should be fun. Well, as it turns out, you learn that fear and being scared and being nervous is part of the fun, part of the challenge. And when you ask what that means to a community, all those people came from all walks of life. Every 64,000 of them came from all over southeastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, maybe New York. And they came there because they love baseball. And many of them came there because for so many years they've been waiting for a moment like this. For 97 years. When I threw that fastball and struck out Willie Wilson, somebody said after the game, Tug, that's the slowest fastball in Philadelphia history. So I threw it as hard as I could. And they said, you don't understand. It took 97 years to get here. Ah, it made me feel so good. Because I thought for sure on the radar gun it was faster than that. But anyway, all those people come to the ballpark, and whether you were there as a fan, sitting in a box seat right behind the dugout, or whether you were sitting in the upper deck in center field, or whether you were a vendor, or a cook, or an accountant, or a special security guard, or one of Philadelphia's finest, remember the dogs and the horses? No matter who you were, when that moment came, we all felt the same way. We all were there for the same reason. It didn't matter what our purpose was. We were there because we wanted to be there when the moment came. And to me, I don't think I felt any different having thrown the pitch that struck out Willie Wilson, who became my favorite all-time ball player. I carry his picture in my wallet. Fine man. Of course, had the tide been turned, I'd have been his favorite ball player. But we were all there for the same reason. It meant the same. It didn't mean any more to me than it did to you and those of us that shared in the glory of that moment, because we love baseball. And what does that mean to a community? Whether it's in Reading or any of the towns that I already mentioned, I think our sports teams help define the character of our communities. I think when one of the most frustrating things about losing year after year after year is the citizens of that city start to feel like losers when other people come in from out of town and they say, what about those Phillies? Like right now, they lost 11 or 12 in a row. That makes us all feel bad because we don't want everybody to think we're losers, just the Phillies. But they're part of us. And so when we win, we really celebrate it because it makes us all winners. And the same thing happens, and it filters right down into our communities with Little League and all that kind of stuff. We try very hard to give everybody the opportunity to experience the challenge. And we define it by winning or losing. And that's just the way society does it. We try to teach the Lombardi philosophy. It's not how whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. But believe me, when you play the game well and you practice and you learn and you have experiences and you learn by them, then it is more fun. We go out there to have fun. That's what our coaches tell us when we're young. Just go out and have fun. But you can have more fun if you do it right. So it's very important to have this activity throughout our communities and to maintain the health of the community, whether it be sports, whether it be art, music, whether it be taking care of the sick, whether it be the handicapped. We define ourselves by how well we treat our people and how much we contribute as individuals to the well-being of the community. And I think ownership in baseball has a huge responsibility, and I'm not sure the Phillies at this particular point in time understand. They've made this new stadium a top priority, and that's good. It's open for debate, but overall, it's good to get a new stadium. But more importantly, it's good to have a quality product. It's good to have a good baseball team. And people don't understand the politics of it. They just see the win-loss column in the newspaper. That's what's important. And I think the Phillies are focused so much on this new stadium, I think they forgot that they got a team on the field right now. And they've got to provide that pride to the community through that team. So let's go back a little bit on that subject and think about what baseball has meant in some of the cities that I've been fortunate enough to play on. Let's go back to the 60s. Let's go back to 1962 when the Mets were born, when they first fielded a big league team. And let's think about what was going on in the 60s and why that Mets team ended up becoming the Miracle Mets. And you know what I'll do? Let's start right over here. This ring is 30 years old this year. It's the World Championship ring from the 1969 Miracle Mets. So is my watch. And the reason I'm wearing, you're going to wonder why I'm wearing this Mets stuff tonight, but the reason is it's our 30th anniversary this year, and I'm committing this year to that wonderful occasion. Next year, I'll have all my Philly stuff on. It'll be 20th anniversary of the World Champion Mets. So if you'd be so kind as to take that and just everybody take a look at it and pass it around the room. That has been in a lot of rooms around the country, and I've always gotten it back. Always wanting to do a good job. This is partially damaged. I didn't get a chance to get it real clean. But this is the trophy from the 1980 World Championship. This is our World Series trophy, and I want to share it with you tonight. I brought my own exhibit. So while you're looking at that, maybe that'll help keep you awake. Let's go back to the 60s. The Mets were born in 1961, and they were known as the Clowns of baseball, the worst team in the history of the game. Casey Stengel was the manager. In the early 60s, the decade started off, it was going to be a pretty good decade. World War II was behind us. The Korean War was behind us. Things were prospering. We had the Cold War going on. Nikita Khrushchev was running Russia. And John F. Kennedy became the first Catholic elected president of the United States. And shortly after he came in, the Russians decided to challenge the young new president. and they tried to put missiles in Cuba. And we remember the Cuban blockade and how we stood up to Russia. That was a very tense time for American citizens. We didn't know what was going to happen there. That could have made for real all the times that we did drills in our classrooms where we had to hide under the desk. Remember? That brought it to light. Those drills became real. I remember them. And then we won the face-off. Missiles went home to Russia. And then shortly after that, we lost President Kennedy. And we thought, that's the kind of thing that happened in history years ago. That's the kind of thing that Abraham Lincoln, that doesn't happen now in our country, but it did. Scared the dickens out of us when that happened. And it's a date that most of us will always remember, what we were doing, where we were. And shortly after that, in 1965, we started building up in Vietnam, and the war started to fester. And it got to be a big concern to everybody, and the young men on the college campuses were burning their draft cards and running off to Canada. And it just tore the country apart because nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew what was right or wrong, what was the right decision here. And patriotism was standing there, but then another form of patriotism evolved like it had never evolved before since the American Revolution. What to do with this war? Our young people were completely confused. And then we had the women. Now, there's some parts of this weren't that bad. They were out burning their underwear. And then after they burnt their bras, they put on tie-dye T-shirts. Remember those days? Of course, growing up in Northern California with Berkeley and Stanford and San Francisco State, tie-dye was big. And then our country started getting involved with drugs and alcohol, and things got way, way, way crazy. And the fashion designers were making us wear things that remember how we dressed in the 60s? Guys, you have no idea. It's almost as bad as those plumber pants you wear today with the underwear and yeah, you got it. Our parents were on us as bad as we're on you. And believe me, I've got 3 boys still at home. I've got a 16, a 14, and a 3. If we have time, I'll tell you about my kids. They're great. But I've got 6 total. Got mine, hers, and ours. My 3-year-old is the only one related to everybody. He completed the cycle of life. Anyway, the 60s, we had hairdos, and we had what they called hippies, and everybody thought they were filthy and dirty and pot smokers and had no contribution to society, draft dodgers, and yet some of those hippies were concerned and cared about this country as much as anybody. And then we had the war build-up, and in 1968 we had the Tet Offensive, then we had Kent State, and the whole decade started to become a mess. What is going on in our country here? The 60s are driving us crazy. And then in 1969, in July, a little bit of hope and inspiration. One small step for man, one giant step for mankind. We landed on the moon. And one of the little headlines in the New York Times was, in the sports section, if they could put a man on the moon, the Mets could win the pennant. At that time, when Neil Armstrong stepped foot on the moon, the Mets were buried in last place, 11 games down, way under 500. And everybody laughed. Oh, what a joke. But you know what? We had guys on that team that were young, wanted to shake the image of being losers. We had some quality guys on that team, some guys that really cared about themselves. They cared about baseball. They cared about life. And we wanted to make a statement. And so suddenly, this thing took on a real feeling. In the last 2 months of the season, we played .750 baseball. We never lost more than 2 games in a row. We had 11, 12, 10, 9-game winning streaks. You wouldn't believe how hot we ended up winning 100 games that year. We beat Atlanta in the playoffs. And we went and we lost the first game to Baltimore in the World Series. And then Baltimore thought they had us beat because they had the best pitching staff in baseball. They had Palmer, Cuellar, Dave McNally, a couple others. And we had unknowns. We had Tom Seaver. We had Nolan Ryan. Jerry Kuzman, Jim McAndrew, Don Cardwell, George Stone. We had a pitching staff that was unheard of. And down in the bullpen, hello, the Tugger had learned how to throw the screwball. And we had a team that platooned at every position. We had a veteran at the corners, Don Clendenin, Ed Charles. We had a great catcher. We used to call him Game Face Grody. Didn't know how to smile. And Tommy Agee in center field made 2 great catches in the World Series. Ron Swoboda, who was known as Iron Man because his glove was like an iron frying pan. Everything would bounce out. Made one of the greatest catches in right field in World Series history. Demoralized them. And we won 4 straight games after losing the opener. And we became known as the Miracle Mets. Now, the significant thing about this, and why I'm telling you all this, is that during the decade of the 60s, confusing. It was a potpourri. Nobody knew where we going to go when the 60s are over. What's going to happen in the 70s? And at the end of the 60s, the Mets being the underdogs, and New York fans all over the country, and fans that weren't even really into baseball, adopted the Mets as their favorite team, took them under their wings because they'd grown up and become big boys, and now they inspired everybody. The underdog has a chance. When there's no hope at all, there's the Mets. And the Mets won the World Series and finished the 60s with an exclamation point and gave everybody newfound hope as we went into the 70s. And then we get to the 73 Mets, and that's right during the Watergate era. And again, we lost credibility as a country. The White House was losing credibility. And don't these things seem to recycle themselves? And along come the New York Mets, who again, halfway through the season, were in last place and couldn't seem to get over 500 baseball. And then somewhere right towards the end of the season, playing under 500 baseball, we caught on fire. The division was so difficult, nobody could win it. Pittsburgh, Montreal, St. Louis, Philadelphia, all those teams had a chance to win the division going into the last week of the season. It was up for grabs. And you remember the phrase? The Mets came along and won the division the day after the season was over because of some rainout games. And it was the You Gotta Believe Mets. And so those same Mets that helped usher us out of the 60s and into the 70s during that terrible time of confusion made people believe again. You gotta believe. You have to believe. There's no other choice. And we went ahead and we won the National League pennant. So what does baseball mean? Baseball's a metaphor. It identifies our culture. There's guys that play baseball from every corner of this country and most of the corners of the Western Hemisphere. Guys from every nook and cranny, guys from every racial background, every ethnic background, every religious background, every economic background. Remember George Stone of the Phillies? Jeff Stone, outfielder? He signed out of a soybean farm in Missouri barefoot. Didn't have a pair of spikes. Made it to the big leagues. Takes all kinds, folks. Takes all kinds. And the beautiful thing is that when you apply the mastermind principle, so to speak, where everybody's thinking alike, regardless of our differences, where we're thinking alike, shooting for a common goal, baseball's the great metaphor. Teamwork, working together, even though we're different. And afterwards, when the game is over, we may all go our separate ways. But when we join together again, back at work, playing baseball, we tell the whole world that this can happen. This works. And then we move on. We move on, and we get real close to the 1980s. Yeah. And over in Philadelphia during the 70s, oh, God, we remember 1950, of course, when the Whiz Kids got beat by the Yankees 4 games straight. And those guys were the greatest guys in Philadelphia baseball history. Robin Roberts and Itchy Rashburn. Did I say that right? Johnny Callison. You name them. Name them. Help me here. Andy Semenick. Granny Hammer. Jim Constanti. Kurt Simmons. See there? See there? It comes back to you and it feels good, doesn't it? Until you remember they lost 4 straight. Remember him? Huh? And his old man played, too. And his father, excuse me. Sorry, George. Well, they started to develop a team. Back in the early 70s, you started signing guys like Larry Boa, Mike Schmidt out of Ohio, Bob Boone out of Stanford. They made some trades. Remember Gentleman Jim Lonborg came? Howie, you were part of that. Howie used to make all those deals. Helped, anyway. And then we developed these guys in our minor league system. I think that was your big bag. And up comes Jerry Martin and Greg Luzinski. We traded for Carlton. We got Larry Christensen. We got Bob Walk. We got Marty Bystrom. We got Dickie Knowles. We got all these guys brewing down in our minor league system. In 76, we won the division. Couldn't win the pennant. 77, we won the division. Couldn't win the pennant. 78, won the division. Couldn't win the pennant. Gee! So 79, we finished 4th. We couldn't take it anymore. Enough. So at the end of the 78 season, find out what was broken. How are we going to fix it? Dallas Green said, I'll fix it. Let me go down and see what's wrong. The big D, the big bopper. He comes down to the clubhouse the beginning of September and says, guys, I'm the interim manager. Danny Ozark wasn't fired because he wasn't a good manager. He was fired because you guys let him down. And I'm down here to find out why. For the last month of the season, I'm going to be watching every one of you guys. And the guys that I think are part of the problem, you're gone next year. The guys that I think can make this team win, you're going to stay. And over the off season, they evaluated the team, and Dallas Green says, with maybe just a couple of changes, bring in a couple of guys, this team can win. And when they were looking for a new manager, Dallas Green said, give me the job, and I'll make sure that this team wins. Well, we opened the season in 1980, and things still weren't settled. There was riff over who was going to be in the starting lineup, whether he was going to platoon or not, how often people were going to be rested, who was going to get to pitch here, who was going to pitch there, who got to play, And finally, about halfway through the season, the team exploded out in San Francisco. Remember the San Francisco meeting? Dallas went off on everybody. He got in everybody's face. And even the guys that there was no apparent thing to yell at him about, he got in their face and said, I know there's something, I just haven't found out what it was yet. He got everybody. And then we lost a game in Pittsburgh, the first game of a doubleheader, and he did the same thing, just to remind us that it wasn't over until it's over. In the second half of that season in 1980, man, you could just see it start to click. You could see it start to click. Man, you could feel adrenaline running through your body every time you came to the ballpark. We got down to the end of the season, the last week of the season. How many people remember the last week of that season? Oh, my God. Montreal came into Philadelphia to start off the week and beat us 2 out of 3. Oh, geez. Now we're a game out. And we got Chicago coming in, who's normally not a threat, but we had a makeup game with them. We had to play Chicago 4 games in a row. 4 games in a row, and we couldn't afford to lose, because then we'd be 2 games out going into Montreal. We had to finish the season up in Montreal. If we don't sweep Chicago, we go to Montreal, we have to win 2 out of 3. Actually, we had to sweep them. So we swept Chicago. We beat them. And then we go to Montreal, and we have to win 2 out of 3. We have to win Friday night. We have to win Saturday because we didn't want it to go all the way to Sunday. And I'll tell you what, you talk about a baseball series, and you talk about something that felt important in your life, and you talk about something that you worked hard for, and you talk about representing not only the city, not only the team, not only the game of baseball, but you were out there representing every coach you ever had from the time you were a little kid. Every one of those sponsors, every one of your teachers, every one of your cousins, your aunts, your uncles, your grandparents. You were all out there because of the job they did raising you, and you wouldn't be there without them. Oh, my God. I remember standing on the mound. Well, actually, let me take you back a little bit before that. Driving to the ballpark, the sixth game of the World Series. Mike Schmidt was kind of a neighbor of mine. He lived in a nice neighborhood. I lived on the south side of the tracks. Relievers, they didn't let us into the nice neighborhood. I lived in Rose Valley, Media, Pennsylvania, and Schmitty lived up on Springton Lake with a nice water view. I had Ridley Creek behind my house. Better trout in my creek than were his lakes. Schmitty would come by my house, and on days when he felt good, he would drive, sometimes his Rolls Royce, sometimes his Mercedes. And if he felt good, he would drive, and my job was to read the Daily News and the Inquirer sports section. And every time I read it to him, I emphasized my name. And Tug McGraw comes in and gets the save, and then I would read the box score. Mike Schmidt got 3 for 4, hit a home run. Nice job, Mike. Headlines, Tug McGraw saves another. Look at this picture, Mike. See me. He's driving along. And on days when he was tired, I would drive. Once in a while, I'd get to drive the Rolls. Once in a while, I'd drive the Mercedes. But if he didn't have those available, if his wife or somebody needed the car, I got to drive in my 55 Buick Special with a Dynaflow transmission and a radio that played all old songs. He was embarrassed to be riding in that car, but I loved it. It was turquoise and white with big, fat, white sidewalls. Beautiful thing. Well, on the way to the ballpark for the sixth game, we stopped at there was a Baskin Robbins. And if that was crowded, we'd go on to the next place, was a little soft ice cream place. And each of us, the whole half of the season, almost every day, we'd get a black and white milkshake. And just about the time we pulled into the ballpark, you'd hear that. To me, that's one of the worst sounds in my life, when the milkshake is gone. I could eat a milkshake this big. And I have. Trying to cut back. Bill Giles recently told me that if I could lose 20, that he'd pay me $1 million to make a comeback. And I said, Bill, I'm there. I could lose 20 in a month. I'll be in top condition. He says, Tug, you don't understand. I'm talking years, not pounds. These owners. So we drive to the ballpark, and on the way to the ballpark, Schmitty is complaining to me. You know, Tug, the last month of the season, you pitched in 23 out of 27 games, and every day you come in and I gave up 3 runs or something like that, and I was really feeling pretty good those days. And Schmitty was banging out home runs, knocking in runs, making great fielding plays, even stealing occasional base. And he was all beat up. Third basemen get beat up over the course of the year. And I couldn't help it, but Schmitty was saying, Tug, you're getting all the headlines. Tug, you're getting your picture in the paper. You come in and you pitch a half an inning. You pitch 1 or 2 innings. Then you get a headline. You strike somebody out. You get a save. He says, I get my name in the box score. This ain't right. He says, I got a feeling tonight, when this game is over, we're going to be world champions. And he said, I got a feeling Carlson's going to run into trouble, and I think you're going to come in and you're going to save the game. And he says, I think you're going to strike somebody out at the end of the game. And he says, I think you're going to try to get all the pictures taken again. He says, I'm going to run over from third base, and I'm going to dive on top of you, and that way I'll get my picture in the paper. And you know, do you remember the picture? That's exactly what he did. The next day, you saw my arm. I got my arm in the paper. It's a beautiful moment that Schmitty and I share together every time we get together. But what does it mean? What does all that mean? What does it mean that the Phillies had that wonderful moment? It means that it reestablished the character of Philadelphia. It made Philadelphia a winner for the first time in baseball history. It made everybody throw their shoulders back, suck in their tummies, put their chin out, and say, I'm from Philadelphia. I'm a Phillies fan. You know, that made us all feel better. And that's what it's all about. Sports teams help identify the character of a community. I firmly believe that. And in order for a community to have that opportunity, the community has to support the teams through thick or thin. And they have to help solve problems. Somebody needs to help the Phillies right now. Could be you. Could be you. You had that ring there? Did you try it on? Maybe you'll have your own someday. And I hope so. I hope your dreams come true. And if it's not baseball,
I'm not planning on going to the Phillies.
well, after tonight, maybe you'll change your mind. We're in Philadelphia. Now you know how it felt to be Mike Schmidt. But ladies and gentlemen, in comparing the teams, the 1980 team to the 1969 team, there's no comparison because it felt the same. Different community, different time, a whole different thing going on around us outside the ballpark. But when the moment comes, it's beautiful. And one's not any better than the other. Maybe you got there through a different road. The Mets were pitching and defense back in those days. And in 80, the Phillies were more slugging it out. We had slugging and defense. And we had a good pitching staff anchored around Steve Carlton. Remember Steve? I tell you what, during the course of the season, Lefty was such a finely conditioned man that you could pretty much anticipate that he was going to throw a complete game or close to it. I used to go out the night before Carlton pitched. But now when Larry Christensen was going to pitch the next day, I stayed in. I used to go up to Carlton. I did this in the 6th game of the World Series. But I used to do it to Christensen all the time during the season. I didn't mess with Carlton too much. He did all that kung fu stuff. I didn't mess with him too much. We all right? All right? So, just before the 6th game of the World Series, Lefty's locker is 2 down from mine. And he's sitting over there. It's about 5 minutes before he's ready to go warm up. He's sitting in his chair in deep concentration. Lefty could go into his own, you wouldn't believe. He could focus. It takes a lot of training and it takes a lot of love and passion to be able to block things out and focus on something that you believe in. And Lefty would sit there, and he was sitting in his locker getting ready to go warm up. And you could almost hear him. So I went over. I tapped him on the shoulder. Lefty. What? He said, are you pitching tonight? Yeah. And I said, me too. Having a little fun. Sometimes when you get nervous, you know. Gary Maddox used to read the Bible before the game. He'd be sitting there in his locker with his Bible open, had the ribbons to his favorite pages. And now Larry Boa used to walk around the clubhouse trying to stir things up. Boa wasn't happy unless he was mad. Boa wasn't happy unless everybody was mad at him. This is just the way he operated. He had to go out there with all this stuff going on around him, and if it wasn't enough, he'd create more in the clubhouse. And that's just the way Boa was. And that's how you got to learn to love people for what they are. And Boa was a good shortstop. You know, you could be totally mad at him, but when you stood on the mound, you didn't have to look over there to see if he was in the right place. You didn't have to turn around to see if he was ready. You knew. You trusted Larry Boa on a baseball field. And that's what teamwork is, trusting one another. Working hard, knowing they worked as hard to be there as you did. Knowing that before the game they're out there doing their work as hard as you are, so that when I got on the mound, to me that was almost the easy part, because the hard part was my prep work. That's like painting a building. The prep work is more important than the paint, because if you don't do the prep work, the paint's going to peel right off. So Boa used to do for his prep work, antagonize everybody. So Maddox was over there reading the Bible. And Boa would come up, pull the ribbon up, and slam the Bible shut. True. I wouldn't lie to you. Maddox's jugular veins would start to stick out. He'd stand up. Maddox about 6'3", 6'4". He'd stand up, and his big shoulders would look down at Bo, and the Bo would say, "The devil made me do it." Luzinski would sit in his locker, and before he got there, Bo would load it with cheeseburgers and donuts, pizza. Unbelievable. And Bob Boone came out to me right in the middle of the last inning, and he says, "Tuggles, isn't this exciting?" This is a guy that graduated from Stanford University with a pre-med degree in psychology. "Tuggles, isn't this exciting?" I said, "Booney, you better stay away from San Francisco. You talk funny when you're nervous." I remember the dogs and the horses, the canine corps. There it was, the last inning, and I'm getting ready to throw that last pitch, and I look over and I see the canine corps over there right next to Dallas Green. There's a big German Shepherd with a policeman behind it. It's the canine corps, and I said, "This is the 9th inning, and I need a K." So I took that strange thing that was not usually noticed in a ballpark, and said, let's work that into my favor. It's the canine corps, it's the 9th inning, and I need a K. You know how to keep score? K is a strikeout. And then there was a horse over there with a mounted police on him at the other end of the dugout on the warning track. And we came to the conclusion real quickly that these horses weren't trained before this game. They had no manners. So I said, if I don't do a good job here with the bases loaded, I'm going to be just like that stuff laying next to that horse on the AstroTurf. And I'll have to move out to Palm Springs and become Gene Mock's next-door neighbor. But all in all, my whole point tonight is that it takes all of us to support a baseball team. It takes all of us to teach baseball. And it's not just baseball. Like I said, baseball is a metaphor, and it applies to everything in our community. The way we do business, the way we set up programs for our kids, the way we take care of our elderly, the way we take care of our handicapped, it's all part of our community working together as a team. And as far as I'm concerned, when organizations that are as substantial as the Chester County Historical Society take notice of that and put baseball exhibitions on display for everybody to enjoy, it means the world to the community. And for a guy like me, whose dreams actually came true, it means everything. So I thank the Historical Society for the work you do, and I thank you so very much for inviting me here tonight. Thank you.
That was Tug McGraw, September 15th, 1999. Thanks, Tug, for all you did for the Phillies, their fans, and for the game of baseball. You will always be one of the most beloved figures in our city. And thank you, Philly fans, for tuning in. See you next week for another podcast of Philadelphia baseball, past, present, and personal. This is Bill Kashatus, rounding third and heading home on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network.